The rain had been falling since vespers, thin and cold, the kind that soaked through wool before a woman noticed it was wet. It smelled of wet stone and horse and coal smoke, and under all of that, the sweet iron smell of the river running high past the eastern gate. The lamps along Fisher Lane guttered in their brackets. A door slammed somewhere behind a shuttered inn. The town of Larkholt, 4 streets from spire to warehouse, had gone in early and pulled the blankets up over its head. She was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. Her name was Wren Halloway, 25, dark hair scraped back under a scrap of undyed linen, hands red at the knuckles from lye and cold water, eyes the plain brown of turned earth, not rich, not poor, the kind of girl people walked past on a market day without noticing she had stepped aside to let them by. Her mother was dead 9 winters. Her father had gone into the river with a cart and 2 mules the summer she turned 16 and had not come out. She had one competence, and it had kept her fed. She could carry a full tray up the twisting back stair of the Blue Heron without spilling a drop of anything. And she could do it in the dark. Tonight the house would hear one more thing than it was ready for. The Blue Heron was the only inn in Larkholt that took gentry. It sat back from the square behind a courtyard wall, and behind the wall a stable, and behind the stable a kitchen that had not gone cold since Michaelmas. Wren had worked its scullery since she was 13. She had graduated to trays a year ago, when the old woman who carried them went blind in one eye. She kept out of the way. She spoke when spoken to. She did not curtsy to gentlemen unless they gave her the look that required it, and she gave it back plainly if they did not. She was carrying broth up the back stair when she heard the boy crying. It was not a full cry. It was the swallowed kind, the kind a child learns when he has been told once too often that noise brings trouble. It was coming from the woodshed off the courtyard. She stood on the landing with the tray balanced on her hip, and she listened. She counted 3 swallowed sobs, then she went down the back stair again, set the tray on the sideboard by the taproom door, and walked out into the rain without a shawl. The boy was maybe 7. He was one of the drover's boys, a scrap of a thing with a bad foot, and a face that had been hit that afternoon. He was sitting in the mud between 2 stacked hurdles, his back to the shed wall, holding his own left wrist very carefully in his right hand. The wrist was wrong. It sat at an angle a wrist should not. "Peter," she said. She knew his name because she made a point of knowing them. "Show me." He did not want to show her. He was afraid of what she would do about it, which was to say he was afraid she would fetch the drover, who had done it. She sat down in the mud beside him. She did not touch him. She waited. After a long moment he uncurled his good hand and let her see. She had set a wrist once, for a stable lad who had fallen off a rail. She remembered the way the bones had wanted to go. She talked to Peter in a low, even voice about nothing at all, about the way the rain was falling, and how the rooks had come down early off the church roof. And while she talked she felt along the bone with fingers that did not shake. He whimpered once. She said, I know, in a minute. Then she set it, quick, the way you had to, and he screamed once into the wet cloth of her sleeve, and then he was quiet. She tore a strip off her own underskirt for the splint. She used 2 flat sticks from the kindling pile. She tied it firm but not cruel. She lifted him because his foot was bad, and the mud was deep, and she carried him not into the inn where the drover would find him, but through the kitchen garden gate, and up the outside stair to the loft above the wash-house, where the laundress slept, and where nobody would look for a drover's boy. She laid him on the straw pallet. She fetched him bread and dripping. She sat with him until the swallowed sobs stopped and his eyes closed. Then she stood, and only then did her own hands begin to shake, and she put them flat against the wall until they stopped. She did not think anyone had seen. She was wrong. From the small square window of the upper corridor, 3 stories above the courtyard, a man had watched the whole thing. He was travelling under the name Mr. Ashfield. He had grey wool travelling clothes and a plain black cloak, and a horse in the stable that was better bred than his cloak. His face was hard-boned. His nose had been broken at some point and set by someone who did not know his business, and his eyes were the colour of pewter. He had come down alone that morning off the northern road. He had signed the register in a hand the innkeeper had not been able to read. He had asked for a private room, and he had paid in coin. He was not Mr. Ashfield. He was Adrian Corvain, Duke of Thornmere, and he had been travelling incognito for 11 days on the matter of a man he intended to see hang. He had watched the girl set a bone in the rain with a strip of her own underskirt and carry a bruised drover's boy out of sight of the drover. He had watched her hands shake against the wall afterward. He stood a long time at the window after she had gone. Then he turned and went back to his room and wrote 3 lines in a small book he carried, and did not sleep. If you are with me at the fire tonight, I ask you a small thing before we go on. Subscribe to the channel so the next of these stories finds you when it is ready. Then come back and sit down. The rain has not stopped. She did not know then that the man who had watched her in the rain would sit at the high table of the Blue Heron the following evening in the Duke of Thornmere's own colours, nor that he would eat off the plate she carried, nor that a man with a knife under his coat was already in the tap-room drinking sour ale and waiting for him. The morning came grey. Wren went up to the loft before first light with warm milk and a heel of bread. Peter was asleep. His wrist had swollen, but the fingers were pink and warm, and he could move them a little when she asked. She left the milk. She went down and started the fires. By the time the sun was properly up, the whole inn was in an uproar, because a duke had sent word ahead that he was coming down that afternoon, on the king's business, and would take rooms, and would dine in the private parlour, and would require the tap-room cleared of common trade at 6. A duke, said Meg the cook, who had seen everything and been surprised by very little. In Larkholt, in November, on the king's business. There is only one piece of king's business in Larkholt this month, and that is Tobias Wren. Who is Tobias Wren? Said Wren, who did not follow such things. A man who is going to hang, said Meg. Or he is not. Depends who arrives to say the last word over him. Set the copper on. We will need more water than we have. Tobias Wren was a bailiff who had taken rents on Thornmere lands 2 counties over, and had kept 1/3 of them, and had burned the ledgers when a clerk began asking questions. The clerk had died. The coroner had said the fire took him. The Duke's steward had said otherwise. The trial had been moved to Larkholt because Larkholt was neutral ground, and the Duke had said he would come himself to give evidence, which no Duke in living memory had done. Wren had friends in Larkholt. Wren had cousins in Larkholt. Wren had a brother, a hard slab of a man called Col Wren, who had been drinking in the Blue Heron tap-room for 3 nights running, and had not been drunk once. Wren carried water. She scrubbed the private parlour floorboards on her knees. She set the long table for 8, and then reset it for 6, when the innkeeper changed his mind. She polished the pewter jugs with wood ash and rag. She did not think about the drover or the drover's boy. The drover had been paid off that morning. and sent on to the next market with a warning from the innkeeper that Wren had not asked for, and had not enjoyed hearing given. The boy would stay in the loft. Meg had agreed to that in 3 words, and had not asked what it would cost the house. At 4 o'clock a carriage came into the yard with 4 bays and an outrider in Thornmere Green, and Wren, carrying an empty coal scuttle across the courtyard, stopped and set it down, and stared like everyone else. The man who got out was tall and grey-eyed, and had a broken nose. He was wearing green now instead of grey. He looked at the courtyard once, took it in the way a man takes in a room he has already stood in, and his eyes went to the door of the woodshed and paused there for the space of a heartbeat before they moved on. He did not look at her. She thought, for one bad half-second, that he did not need to. She picked up the coal scuttle and went inside, the private parlour filled by 6. The Duke sat at the head. His steward, a lean older man named Halbrook, sat at his right. The magistrate of Larcolt, a fat pink man named Sir Peter Colfax, sat at his left, and beside Colfax sat the county coroner, and beside the coroner sat 2 clerks with ink already on their cuffs. 6 chairs, 6 men. Wren carried in the first course. She carried in the second. She kept her eyes on the tray. She had already decided she would not think about the man at the head of the table, because thinking about him made her hands unsteady, and unsteady hands spilled soup. The Duke did not speak to her. He spoke to Halbrook in a low, even voice about a road that needed mending on the northern boundary. He spoke to Colfax about the winter assizes. He did not once look at her face. He did look, when she set down the venison, at her hands. She saw him see them. She saw him see the scab across the base of her thumb where Peter had bitten down when she set the wrist. She saw his mouth do a thing that was not quite a smile and was not quite anything else. And then she was out of the room with the empty platter, and her own breath was coming too fast, and Meg looked at her from the sideboard and said only, "Steady, girl, I am steady," said Wren. "You are not," said Meg, "but you will be." She went back in with the wine. The tap-room door beyond the parlour banged open somewhere, and a burst of common voices came through, and then was cut off. She did not turn her head. She poured. The Duke, without looking up, said, "Thank you," in a voice pitched only for her, and she did not answer, because she did not trust her voice, and because a serving girl did not answer a duke at his own table, except with what her hands were doing. She was setting the second wine at the coroner's elbow, when the parlour door slammed open behind her. Col Wren came through it. He had a knife in his right hand, a long thin one, a boning knife off a butcher's block, and his left arm was already up and swinging to sweep the clerks aside. He did not shout. He had not been drinking that evening. He was cold sober, and he was moving fast, and he was going straight for the Duke, and the Duke was still seated, and the Duke's steward was on the wrong side of the table, and the magistrate had frozen with his wine cup halfway to his mouth. Wren did not think. She moved. The tray in her hands was pewter, wide and heavy, still holding 2 empty cups and a jug on its rim. She swung it 2-handed, the way a woman with one competence swings the only thing she is holding, and she caught Col Wren's knife hand at the wrist as it came down. The pewter rang like a bell. The knife went sideways and buried itself 2 inches into the oak of the parlour table, not a hand's breadth from the Duke's plate. Col Wren stumbled. The tray came back on its own weight, and caught him across the side of the jaw, and he went down onto one knee, and by then Halbrook was around the table, with both hands on his collar, and one of the clerks, a boy of 19 with more nerve than sense, had sat on his legs. The whole thing had taken perhaps 5 seconds. The wine jug lay on its side on the floor and was pouring red into the boards. Wren stood with the empty tray hanging from her hand. Her breath was very loud in her own ears. The Duke was still seated. He had not moved at all. He was looking at her, straight at her, for the first time that evening. His eyes were the colour of pewter, and they did not blink. "Miss," he said, quietly, "set the tray down." She set it down. She set it down very carefully on the sideboard, because if she had not set it carefully, she would have dropped it. She did not curtsy. She did not speak. She looked at the knife stuck in the table, and then she looked at the wine going into the floorboards, and she said, in a voice that came out steadier than she felt, "I will fetch a cloth." "Sit down first," said the Duke. "I do not sit in this room, your Grace." "You do tonight," said the Duke. Halbrook, a chair. Halbrook, still with one hand in Cole Wren's collar, said, "Your Grace," and did not move to fetch a chair because he had a man in his fist. The coroner fetched the chair. The magistrate, who had not moved through any of it, remembered he was the magistrate, and stood up and began, at last, to shout for constables. Wren did not sit. She stood by the chair. She was aware, distantly, that her left sleeve was wet, though she did not remember spilling anything on it, and then she was aware that it was blood, and that it was hers, because Cole Wren's knife had opened her forearm on its way down, and she had not felt it. "Your Grace," she said, "I will bleed on your floor." "It is not my floor," said the Duke. "Sit down." She sat. The constables came. Cole Wren was taken away. Halbrook, who turned out to know his business with a torn arm as well as with the Duke's accounts, cut her sleeve up to the elbow with the paring knife off the cheese board, and packed the cut with clean linen from the sideboard drawer, and tied it off, and Wren watched the top of his grey head, and did not look at the Duke, who had not moved from his chair, and who had not once taken his eyes off her face. When Halbrook was done, the Duke said, "Miss Halloway." She looked up. "Yes, your Grace." "How is the boy?" he said. For a long moment she did not understand him. Then she did. She understood him all at once, the way a bolt goes home in a lock, and her face went hot and then cold and then hot again, and she said, "You saw." "I did," said the Duke. "Then you might have helped." "I might," he said. "You did not need me." That was all he said. He rose. He nodded to Halbrook. He said to the magistrate, in the same low, even voice, "You will take the man's statement in the morning. She will not be spoken to tonight." And then he was gone, out of the parlour, up the stair to his rooms, without another look at her, and Wren sat in the chair with the linen tight around her forearm, and understood that a Duke had watched her set a boy's wrist in the rain last night, and had said thank you for it by not saying thank you at all. She did not cry. She had learned not to cry where it showed. She was sent home in the innkeeper's own trap, though she lived only 3 streets away. She was told not to come in the morning. She came in the morning anyway, because if she did not come in the morning Peter would have no breakfast, and because she did not know how to sit in a room by herself with a bandaged arm and a Duke in her head. Meg took one look at her and pointed at the loft stair without a word. Peter was awake. He had eaten the bread. He was frightened of her bandage, and she showed him it was nothing, and that made him braver. She sat on the straw beside him and told him a very small edited piece of what had happened downstairs. She left the Duke out of it. She left the knife out of it. She said only that a bad man had come into the parlour and had been stopped, and that the bad man was in the constable's keeping now, and that no one had been hurt who could not be mended. "Your arm is hurt," said Peter. "My arm will mend," said Wren. "Will the man be hanged?" said Peter, who was 7 and knew what happened to bad men in Larkholt. "That is not for me to say." "Would you go and watch?" said Peter, "if he was?" "No," said Wren, "I would not." "Why?" "Because," said Wren, "watching a man die does not put a wrist back together, and I have better things to do with a morning." Peter thought about this. He said, "You are strange." "I am," said Wren. "Eat your bread." She was coming down the loft stair with the empty cup when she found Halbrook at the bottom of it. He had a leather satchel over his shoulder, and he was standing with his hat in his hand, which for a duke's steward at a scullery stair was unusual. He inclined his head to her the way he had inclined it to the magistrate the night before. "Miss Halloway." "Mr. Halbrook, His Grace asks whether he may speak with you." "I am working, Mr. Halbrook. He is aware. He asks 1/4 of an hour of your time. He does not require it." She looked at the satchel. She looked at Halbrook's face, which was a face that had learned not to give anything away, and had done so for a long time. She said, "Where, the private parlour? It has been made clean." She went. She did not change her apron. She did not smooth her hair. She had decided on the loft stair that she would not pretend to be anything she was not for any man alive, and that included a duke who had watched her from a window and said thank you by not saying it. The parlour had been made clean. The wine was gone off the boards. The knife was gone out of the table, though the small pale slit where it had gone in was still there, and would be there for the life of the oak. The fire had been built up. The Duke was standing by it, with his back to her. He turned when she came in. He was in plain wool again, not green. "Miss Halloway," he said. "Sit, I will stand, your Grace." "Sit," he said again, and this time it was not an order but a request. And she sat because she was tired, and because her arm hurt, and because she did not have the strength to fight over a chair. He did not sit. He stood by the fire, and he looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "My name is not Ashfield." "I know it is not, your Grace. You knew that last night. I knew that yesterday afternoon when you came out of the carriage. Before that, no, your Grace. Before that I thought you were a traveller in grey wool, who had watched me carry a boy across a courtyard and had not told anyone he had watched. I did not tell anyone." "I know," said Wren. "The drover was sent off without knowing where the boy had gone. If you had told, the drover would have come for him." The Duke was quiet a moment. He said, "I wanted to see who you were when you did not know I was watching. You saw a serving girl set a wrist in the mud. I saw a woman who had nothing to gain by it and did it anyway, and hid the child from the man who had hurt him, and put her own hands flat against a wall so no one would see them shake. You saw a great deal from a window, your Grace." "I did." "May I ask you a question?" "You may ask me any question you like." "Was Col Wren coming for you because of what you were going to say at Tobias Wren's trial?" "He was. Then last night was not the first time someone tried to put a knife in you. It was the third. She thought about that. She said, 'You travel alone. Sometimes that is stupid, your Grace.' For the first time she saw his mouth do the thing it had done the night before over her scabbed hand, and this time she saw it become an actual smile, small and slow and not practised. He said, 'It has been said, by your steward, I imagine, by my steward.' Frequently he is right. He is. There was a small silence. She was aware of the fire, and of her own arm, and of the Duke's very steady grey eyes, and she was aware, in a way she had not been aware last night, that this was a room she had scrubbed the floor of on her knees the day before, and that she was sitting in it now on a Duke's invitation, and that neither of those facts changed anything about who she was or what she would say. She said, "Was there something you wished to ask me, Your Grace?" "Two things. Ask them. The first. Will you accept, from me, a purse that would settle the boy's keep for a year, put him with a farrier or a joiner as an apprentice at 7 when he is fit, and cover a doctor to look at the wrist when it heals? Not from you, Your Grace." "Why not?" "Because if I take a purse from you now, it will be said I stopped a knife for a purse. By whom? By me, Your Grace, in my own head, where I have to live." He nodded once. He said, "That is fair. I will settle it through the parish. My name will not be on it. It will be said the money came out of an old bequest of the parish's own. Will you accept that?" She considered. She said, "That is not a purse to me. That is a boy fed." "Yes, good," said the Duke. "The second thing. Ask it. Will you tell me your Christian name?" "Wren, Wren," he said. He said it the way a man says a word he has not used in a long time. "Thank you, Wren. You are welcome, Your Grace." "Adrian," he said, "only when we are private. Not in the house, not in the yard. Only when it is only you and me. That will not happen often, Your Grace." "It might," he said, "if you would allow it." She looked at him a long moment. She said, "I do not know what you are asking me, Your Grace. I am asking you for nothing tonight. I am telling you I will be in Larkholt for a fortnight while the trial is heard. I am telling you I would like, in that fortnight, to sit in this parlour of an evening for an hour and hear you speak of what you think of things. I am telling you I will not send Halbrook to ask you a second time if you say no tonight. And I am telling you that if you say yes, you may end it whenever you please, on any evening, without giving me a reason. Is that clear?" "That is clear, Your Grace." "Then, yes or no?" She thought about Peter in the loft. She thought about her own hands on the wall of the wash-house. She thought about a man in grey wool at a window 3 stories up in the rain. She said, "Yes, thank you," he said. "Thank you," she said, because she meant it, and because she did not know why she meant it, and because the 2 thank yous crossed in the air between them and stayed there. He sat down then, on the other side of the fire, and Halbrook, who had been standing in the doorway all along, and whom neither of them had noticed, cleared his throat once and said, "Your Grace, the magistrate." In 10 minutes, Halbrook, Your Grace. Halbrook went. Wren rose because her 10 minutes was up before it had started, and the Duke rose with her, and at the door she stopped and turned, and said, "Your Grace." "Adrian, Adrian, the tray last night was pewter. If it had been wood you would be dead." "I know," he said. "I have thought of nothing else since." She went back to the kitchen. She scrubbed a pot that did not need scrubbing. Meg looked at her once and did not ask, and Wren was grateful for it, because she did not know yet what she would have answered. The trial began the following Monday. It sat 5 days. The Duke gave his evidence on the Wednesday in a voice so quiet the clerks had to lean forward to catch it, and he did not once look at the dock. And Tobias Wren was convicted on the Friday afternoon of embezzlement and of the manslaughter of the clerk by fire, and was sentenced to transportation for the term of his natural life, which in Larkholt was accounted mercy. Cole Wren was sentenced separately for the attempt in the parlour, and went the same road. Neither of them looked at Wren, who had given her 3 sentences of evidence on the Tuesday from a stool in a corner of the court, in a plain grey dress and a clean white kerchief, and who had walked out after without looking back. The Duke sat in the parlour every evening of that fortnight. He sat on one side of the fire. She sat on the other, when her shift ended, for 1 hour by the mantel clock, and never longer. They spoke, at first, of the trial, and then of the road on the northern boundary that needed mending, and then, on the 4th evening, of her father who had gone into the river with a cart, and on the 6th of his own mother who had died when he was 8, and whom he could no longer remember except by the smell of a particular soap. On the 7th evening she asked him whether he had been much loved as a boy, and he was quiet a long time and said, "No, not much." Not until later. Not until my aunt took me at 12. On the 8th evening she asked him whether he had ever been engaged, and he said, "Once. She was cruel to a housemaid." I ended it. On the 9th she did not ask him anything, and he did not ask her anything, and they sat and watched the fire, and it was the best of the 9 evenings, and both of them knew it. On the 10th evening she came in, and he was not alone. A woman sat in the chair Wren had been sitting in. She was perhaps 30, tall, dressed in dove-grey silk, with pale hair braided high, and a very small, very cold mouth. She looked at Wren the way a woman looks at a piece of furniture that has been put in the wrong place, and she laughed a small bell-like laugh in 3 practised beats. "Adrian," she said, "is this the girl with the tray?" "This is Miss Halloway," said the Duke, and Wren noticed that his voice had gone flat in a way she had not heard it before. "Wren, this is my cousin, Lady Sabine Corvain." "Charmed," said Lady Sabine, and did not rise. "My dear, do come in." "Sit, do sit. Adrian has been telling me you saved his life, with a tray. How very rustic. However did you learn to swing a tray? Was it perhaps from your father? One hears he was a carter." "He was, my lady." "How touching." "Sabine," said the Duke. "Adrian, I am only asking. One is only asking. My dear, do let me see your hand. What red little knuckles. And is that a scar?" "Oh, but of course from the same tray one supposes. How brave. How very brave. You must forgive me. Adrian is my only close relation, and I take an interest. What is it you do, at the inn in general? Do you carry things? Do you clean things?" "Both, I imagine." Both, Wren, who had stood through this without moving, said, in a voice she had used exactly once in her life before, to the drover in the courtyard the morning the constables took him, my lady. "I carry things, and I clean things, and I set bones when the drover breaks them, and I stop knives when the drover's cousin swings them, and I take a wage of 4 shillings a week for the whole of it. Does that answer your interest?" Lady Sabine's small mouth opened and closed. The Duke did not smile, but his eyes did something that was very close to it. "Charming," said Lady Sabine, with a great deal less bell in her laugh this time. "Quite charming. Adrian, you cannot possibly—" "I possibly can," said the Duke. "She will be laughed out of every room in the county. Then she will not enter those rooms. Adrian, Sabine, I will speak with you in the morning." Lady Sabine rose. She swept out. Wren, who had not sat down, remained standing by the door. The Duke looked at the fire a long moment, and then at her. "I am sorry," he said. "Do not be. She only said what she thinks, your Grace." Adrian, Adrian, she will write to my aunt tonight. My aunt will come from Bath on Saturday. There will be scenes. Then there will be scenes, Adrian. They will not be my scenes." She sat down. She sat down because her legs would not carry her out of the room, and because the 9th evening had been very good, and because she did not know how to walk away from a man who had spoken to her for 9 evenings, as if her 4 shillings a week did not weigh anything against the words she said. She sat down and she said, "I would like to go home now. Please, Wren. Please, Adrian." "Not tonight." He did not press. He rose. He walked her to the courtyard door. Halbrook, who was always in doorways, produced a lantern. The Duke did not touch her. He said only, "Tomorrow evening." "I do not know, Adrian." "Tomorrow evening, if you can. If I can." She walked home through streets that smelled of wet stone and river iron and coal smoke, and she went in and shut her door and sat down at her table and put her face in her hands. And she did cry then, once, quick, because there was no one to see. She did not go the next evening. She did not go the evening after. She sent Meg with a note, 3 lines in her own hand, saying only that she was needed at the inn and could not be spared. Meg carried the note in silence, and came back in silence, and set the empty tray on the sideboard and said, "Girl, do not, Meg girl, he is not that cousin. I know he is not that cousin. Then why? Because if I sit in that parlour again after what she said, she will have been right about me, and she will have been right about him, and I would rather she be wrong about both of us in a room I am not sitting in." Meg looked at her a long time. She said, "You are a fool. You are the good kind. It is still a kind of fool." "I know," said Wren. On the 3rd evening after Lady Sabine, Halbrook came to the kitchen door. He did not ask for Wren. He asked for Meg. He gave her a folded letter, and he asked her, in a voice as flat as the Duke's had gone in the parlour, to give it into Wren's hand and no one else's. Then he left. Meg gave it to Wren. Wren took it up to the loft, where Peter was learning to whittle one-handed with his good right hand, and she sat on the straw and broke the seal. It was not from the Duke. It was from Miss Halloway, it said. "I take a liberty in writing which His Grace has not asked me to take, and will not thank me for. There are things I have watched for 11 years which he will never say of himself, and which I think it wrong that you should not know before you refuse him a chair by his fire. His Grace has, for the last 7 years, quietly discharged the rents of 11 tenants on the Thornmere estate, who could not pay them without loss of their cottages, and has forbidden his stewards from naming him as the source. He has, since the summer, paid the school fees of 19 children in 3 villages in the north, whose fathers went into the sea in the storm of last August, and has forbidden the master to say who sends the money. He sent, 4 days ago, to a farrier in this town, £5 and a written apprenticeship for a boy named Peter Halloway, formerly of no fixed home, on condition his name not appear in the paper. I asked him this morning whether I might tell you these things. He said no, I take the liberty regardless. He does not know I am writing. I remain, miss, your servant, J. Halbrook. Wren sat very still on the straw. Peter was talking to her about a piece of wood he thought looked like a horse. She was not hearing him. She read the letter again. She folded it. She put it inside her bodice, against her ribs, where the paper was warm from her skin at once. Peter Halloway. He had given the boy her name. Not because she had asked, because he had understood, without being told, that a boy with no name in a paper of apprenticeship was a boy no one could come for later. She rose. She said to Peter, "I will be back before dark. Do not eat the whole loaf. I will eat half," said Peter. "Eat a third," said Wren. She went down. She took off her apron. She put on her only good dress, which was still not a good dress, and she walked across the courtyard to the private parlour door, and she opened it without knocking, and she went in. He was sitting by the fire. He had a book on his knee that he was not reading. He looked up when the door opened. He did not stand. Wren, Adrian, she stood in the middle of the room. She did not sit. She said, "Halbrook wrote me a letter. I will speak to Halbrook. You will not. You will thank him. You will thank him because he told me a thing you would not tell me, and that I had a right to know. You had no such right. I did. If a man is going to sit across a fire from me for 9 evenings and let me speak plain to him, I have a right to know whether he is the kind of man who pays the rent of a woman who cannot and asks not to be named. Because that is a different man from a duke with a purse. It is the same man. It is not, said Wren. It is not the same man at all. Sit down. He did not sit. He rose instead. He said, Wren, do not make a speech. I do not want a speech. I want to say a thing to you, and I want you to hear it, and then I want to go home and sleep, because I have not slept in 3 nights. Are you listening? I am listening. Your cousin was right about one thing. I will be laughed out of every room in the county. If I sit at your table, I will be a joke told at breakfasts I am not at. That is what will happen. I know that. You know that. Halbrook knows that. I do not care about that on my own account. I care about it on yours, because a man laughed at by his own kind cannot pay the rent of a woman who cannot, and cannot school a fisherman's child, and cannot save a bailiff's clerk, and cannot do quietly the good he does. That is my objection. That is the only one I have. Answer it or do not, but do not tell me it does not matter, because it does. He was quiet a long time. He said, it does matter, it does not decide. Why? Because a man who cannot marry the woman he wants because his cousin would laugh has no business paying anyone's rent. The one is the price of the other. If I let Sabine take you from me, I have already stopped being the man who pays the rents. There is no cleaner version of me who keeps the estate and gives up the woman. There is only the man who keeps both, or loses both. She looked at him. She said, That is a very tidy answer, Adrian, it is true. Tidy things often are. Wren, I have not finished. I want 3 things. If I sit at your table, I want to be spoken to, always, as I have been spoken to in this parlour for 9 evenings, not as your wife, not as your duchess, as Wren. I want never to be lied to again, about a name or a purpose, however kindly the lie is meant. And I want to keep every piece of myself I brought into your house, including the piece that sets wrists in the rain. Can you give me those 3? I can. Say them. I will speak to you always as Adrian to Wren. I will never lie to you again about anything, however kindly. You will keep every piece of yourself, and I will build my house around the pieces if I have to. Then, said Wren, yes, 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 it was the only word I needed. He crossed the room. He did not seize her. He did not speak. He only waited. She lifted her right hand, the one without the bandage, and he took the glove off it finger by finger, slow, the way a man unties a knot he does not wish to break. And he laid the glove on the mantel, and he kissed the palm of her bare hand once, and he held it against his cheek for a long moment, and then he laced his fingers into hers, and did not let go. The rook on the church roof called once, though neither of them heard it. Halbrook, who was in the doorway, cleared his throat once and pretended he had seen nothing, and went to fetch tea. Lady Sabine's aunt came from Bath on the Saturday, as promised. And there were scenes, as promised, and none of them were Wren's scenes, because Wren was not in the room for any of them. The aunt left on the Monday for Bath again, and did not return that year or the next. Lady Sabine wrote a letter to the Duke which the Duke did not open, and which Halbrook, who had learned things from carrying one letter, quietly burned in the parlour grate. They were married in the Larkholt parish church 3 months later, on a morning so cold the frost was on the inside of the windows. The bride wore grey wool with a white kerchief. The groom wore green. The parish had, that same week, come into an unexpected bequest, discovered in an old ledger, sufficient to re-roof the almshouse and put a new bell in the tower, and no one in the parish quite knew where the ledger had come from, and the vicar had been asked not to inquire. Meg cried, once, into her apron, and denied it afterwards. Peter Halloway, aged 7, with his wrist in a sling and a farrier's cap 2 sizes too big, carried the ring on a cushion and did not drop it. A year later, in the long low sitting room of the Duke's house at Thornmere, on an evening in the first frost of November, a fire burned in a grate that had been built up too high and was popping cheerfully at the andirons. A rook called once outside on the roof. 2 figures sat on a low settle drawn up close to the fire. One was reading aloud from a book about bridges, in a voice that was steady and clear, and did not soften its consonants for gentry. The other was listening with his eyes closed, and his broken-nosed profile against the firelight, and his ungloved hand was laced into hers, and their bare fingers did not let go. Lady Sabine Corvain had accepted that spring, a long invitation from a distant cousin in Bath, and had not been heard from since. Tobias Wren and his brother Cole had reached New South Wales, and were, by all accounts, breaking rocks in it. Meg the cook had been prevailed upon, with a great deal of grumbling, to move her copper and her ash-rag to the Thornmere kitchen, and to teach 3 under-cooks how to boil a proper broth. Halbrook, who was too old for it, was still standing in doorways. Peter, at 8, was learning to shoe a pony, and had been heard, once, to say to a stable lad who was crying over a burned finger, "Sit down, show me, in a minute." On the mantel above the fire lay a pair of grey gloves, drawn off finger by finger a year ago, and never quite put on again in that room. Below them, on the settle, the reading had stopped. The Duke had opened his eyes. He was looking at his wife the way he had looked at her, across a wine-soaked parlour floor. She met the look. She did not blush. She said, "What, nothing," he said. "Only what I always look at. You will wear it out, I will not." She smiled once, small and slow and not practised, and went back to the book about bridges. The fire popped. The rook called once and was still. Fair is not the same as kind. There is a difference, and what a woman does when she believes no one of rank is watching is the only thing about her a wise man ever needs to know. If this story sat with you the way it sat with me, subscribe to the channel so the next one finds you by its own firelight, and tell me in the comments, if you would, what you thought Wren should have done when Lady Sabine laughed in that parlour. Hold her tongue, walk out or answer her plain, the way she did. I read them, I think about them. Stay warm tonight, keep a kind hand for whoever cannot pay you back for it, and I will meet you again by the next fire, with the next quiet woman, and the next man who watched her from a window and understood